Positioning. Chapter 16. Positioning an Island, Jamaica. When Edward Seager replaced socialist Michael Manley as Jamaican Prime Minister, he proclaimed an open door for capitalist investment. David Rockefeller was so impressed, he formed a group of 25 American corporate chiefs specifically for the purpose of developing Jamaica. In the due course of events, the Jamaicans, encouraged by the Rockefeller Committee, hired us to develop a position for the island of Jamaica. Investment or tourism? Jamaica at the time needed both, but which should come first? Obviously, investments won't do much for tourism, but many tourists work for big companies. If they come back from Jamaica with favorable impressions, they just might encourage their companies to invest in the island. Executives at those same companies like to invest in places that are fun to visit. Which is why you see so little investment in Alaska and so much in the Caribbean. Who wants to go to Fairbanks in the winter time to check out the plant? The competition. Looking at the Caribbean from a tourist's point of view, there are 4 major competitors to Jamaica: the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Bermuda. Each of these destinations draws more visitors a year than Jamaica. What springs to mind when you mention any of these Caribbean islands? With one exception, the consistent visual image is the couple in the bathing suits on the beach, underneath the palm trees. This sea, sand, and surf picture has become a visual cliché for the Caribbean. The exception, of course, is Bermuda. Years of advertising those motorbikes parked beside the pink sand have put a strong visual in the mind. Effective, too. Our research shows that in terms of perceptions, Bermuda is second in desirability to the U.S. Virgin Islands. If it weren't for the weather factor, Bermuda is considerably north of the other islands. Bermuda would have been in first place. Jamaica's positioning problem is similar to the problem of Belgium. How to put a mental picture postcard into the mind of the Caribbean prospect? The search for the postcard. The first approach is to sort through thousands of postcards to find the one perfect picture of the island of Jamaica. But it can't be found. There's a good reason. If there were one image that captured the essence of the island, someone would have noticed it already and used it. In other words, there would have been an image already burned into at least a few minds. The second approach is to visit Jamaica and shoot hundreds or thousands of pictures trying to capture that elusive mental picture postcard. Not surprisingly, nothing totally right turns up. The third approach is the one that should have been used first. It's to look into the mind of the prospect to see what mental images already exist. And then select one you can tie Jamaica into. What is the verbal essence of Jamaica? An old advertisement said, Jamaica is the big green island in the Caribbean that has deserted beaches, cool mountains, country pastures, open plains, rivers, rapids, waterfalls, ponds, good drinking water, and a youngly interior. Does that sound familiar? Does it remind you of a very popular tourist destination in the Pacific? The Hawaiian connection. That's right. Hawaii. Most people have a mental picture of the big green volcanic mountains coming down to the blue sea. It's a view that you can also see as you approach the island of Jamaica, the Hawaii of the Caribbean. The Hawaii of the Caribbean becomes an even more powerful concept when you compare Jamaica with its 4 biggest competitors. This chart lists the highest point of each destination. At 7,402 feet, Blue Mountain in Jamaica is higher than any point in the United States east of the Mississippi River. Another important comparison is the size of each destination. This chart gives the length of the largest island in each destination. Again, Jamaica is considerably larger than any of its competitors. Jamaica has hundreds of miles of beaches and 2 volcanic mountain ranges with a towering peak over 7,000 feet. This supports the more to see, more to do advantages that are also implicit in the Hawaiian connection. Conceptually, this approach says to tourists that the things they travel a great distance to Hawaii for, natural beauty, big green mountains, beautiful beaches, wonderful year-round weather, can be found a lot closer to home, down in the Caribbean. Jamaica could even copy one of the most successful of Hawaii's marketing ploys, meeting tourists with flowers at the airport. Jamaica has beautiful flowers, and this gesture, above all, would say that Jamaica is a friendly place as well as a beautiful one. Benefits of the Hawaiian position. The Hawaii of the Caribbean provides a quick visual analogy. Jamaica doesn't have the luxury of building that visual image over the years. Transferring Hawaii's mental picture postcards will save enormous amounts of time and money. Furthermore, the concept strongly differentiates Jamaica from the other Caribbean destinations. A poster entitled, "A Cartographer's View of the Caribbean," made this point very graphically. It showed each of the destinations drawn to scale. You need a magnifying glass to find Bermuda. Another major benefit of the Hawaiian analogy is the platform it provides for European programs. If you live on the continent, Hawaii is a long way away. If you're wondering why you haven't heard much about the Hawaii of the Caribbean, you'll have to ask Mr. Siga. He is widely viewed as a Caribbean Ronald Reagan, but he is really the Jimmy Carter of Jamaica, a Rockefeller aide told the Wall Street Journal. He's the person who gets involved in every detail and agonizes over every issue. Presumably he is still agonizing over this one. Chapter 17. Positioning a product, Milk Duds. The brand is Milk Duds, a product of Switzer Clark. Milk Duds is a candy product that comes in a little yellow and brown box. It had a reputation as a movie candy for teenagers, but the company wanted to broaden its Milk Duds business to include the younger crowd. Looking into the mind. The first step in any positioning program is to look inside the mind of the prospect. And who is the prospect for Milk Duds? It's not some little kid who doesn't know the score. Research indicates that the best Milk Duds prospect is a sophisticated candy buyer. He or she has been in and out of candy stores several hundred times at least. The average Milk Duds prospect is 10 years old. A cautious, suspicious, shrewd purchasing agent who is always on the lookout for value received. Most positioning programs are nothing more or less than a search for the obvious. Yet the obvious is easy to miss if you zero in too quickly on the product itself. As with the Purloined Letter of Edgar Allan Poe, the obvious is often hard to find because it's too easy to see. It's too obvious. What's in the prospect's mind when the subject of candy comes up? Not Milk Duds, even though the average 10-year-old kid might be vaguely aware of the brand. For most 10-year-olds, the candy urge immediately conjures up the concept of candy bars. Candy bars like Hershey's, Nestle's, Mounds, Almond Joys, Reese's, Snickers, Milky Ways. Put there, of course, by the millions of dollars worth of advertising spent on these and other candy bar brands. Repositioning the competition. Since Milk Duds was getting only a small fraction of that kind of advertising money, it would have been hopeless to try to build a separate identity for the brand. The only way to drive Milk Duds into the kid's mind was to find a way to reposition the candy bar category. In other words, find a way to make the millions of dollars spent by the competition work for Milk Duds by setting up the brand as an alternative to the candy bar. Little would be gained by just putting another candy name in an overloaded mind. Fortunately, there was a glaring weakness in the candy bar competition that could be exploited. And the weakness is obvious once you look at the size and shape and price of today's Hershey bar. A candy bar just doesn't last very long. A kid can go through a 50-cent Hershey bar in 2.3 seconds flat. There exists a strong undercurrent of dissatisfaction among America's candy eaters. As the candy bar has shrunk in size, this discontent has grown. My allowance doesn't last very long when it comes to candy bars. Either I'm eating faster or candy bars are getting smaller. You can suck up a candy bar awfully fast these days. This is the soft, chocolatey underbelly of the candy bar competition. Milk Duds are different. They come in a box instead of a package. They give the kid 15 individual slow-eating chocolate-covered caramels. Compared with a candy bar, a box of Milk Duds will last a long time. If you try to stuff a whole box in your mouth, it will cement your jaws shut. Which is exactly why the product has been so popular in movie theaters. So what is Milk Duds' new position? The long-lasting alternative. Why, it's America's long-lasting alternative to the candy bar. If this seems like the obvious answer to you, it wasn't to the people who used to do the Milk Duds advertising. In some 15 years of Milk Duds television commercials, there wasn't one reference to the long-lasting idea. Let's take a mental walk through a 30-second television commercial to see how the long-lasting idea was sugar-coated for the benefit of the 10-year-old. Once there was a kid who had a big mouth. A kid is standing next to an enormous mouth. 2. That loved candy bars. The kid is shoveling candy bars one right after another into the mouth. 3. But they didn't last very long. The kid runs out of candy bars and the mouth gets very upset. 4. Then he discovered chocolatey caramel Milk Duds. The kid holds up the Milk Duds, and the mouth starts to lick its chops. 5. The mouth loved the Milk Duds because they last a long time. The kid rolls the Milk Duds one by one up the mouth's tongue. 6. Then the kid and the mouth sing a duet together, which is the campaign song. When a candy bar is only a memory, you'll still be eating your milk duds. 7. Get your mouth some milk duds. Big smiles on both the kid and the mouth. Did it work? Not only did the television advertising reverse a downward sales trend, but in the ensuing months the company sold more milk duds than it ever did in its history. If there is one important lesson to be learned from the milk duds example, it's this: the solution to a positioning problem is usually found in the prospect's mind, not in the product. Chapter 18. Positioning a service, mailgram. What's the difference between the positioning of a product, like milk duds, and the positioning of a service, like Western Union's mailgram? Not much, especially from a strategic point of view. Most of the differences are in techniques. Visual versus verbal. In a product ad, the dominant element is usually the picture, the visual element. In a service ad, the dominant element is usually the words, the verbal element. So if you saw an advertisement with a big picture of an automobile, you would assume the car was being advertised, not a car rental service. With a product like Milk Duds, the primary medium was television, a visually oriented vehicle. With a service like Mailgram, the primary medium was radio, a verbally oriented vehicle. Naturally, there are a lot of exceptions to these principles. If everyone knows what the product looks like, there is no advantage in using print, television, or other forms of visual media. Conversely, if a service can make effective use of a visual symbol, O.J. Simpson for Hertz, for example, then visual media can often be productive. In spite of the exceptions, it's surprising how often these visual/verbal generalities hold up. In a four-way test of newspapers, magazines, radio, and television for Mailgram, the most effective medium was radio. But the essence of the Mailgram story is strategy, not media. Before discussing strategy, it may be helpful to take a look at how the system works. Electronic mail. Developed jointly with the U.S. Postal Service and inaugurated on a limited experimental basis in 1970, Mailgram is the nation's first electronic mail. To send a mailgram, you call Western Union, which transmits the message electronically to a post office near the recipient. The mailgram is delivered the next business day. In addition to sending mailgrams by telephone, the customer can also send them by telex, TWX, magnetic tape, computer, facsimile equipment, or communicating typewriters. Why belabor the technicalities? Why discuss the complex details of the mailgram system? To make an important point. Most advertising programs never go beyond the details of the product or service which is offered for sale. And the more interesting and complex the service is, the more likely this will happen. The marketing people who are responsible for introducing the product get all wrapped up in the service and forget all about the customer. As a matter of fact, the traditional approach would have been to introduce Mailgram as a new, automated, computerized electronic communication service, or something of that sort. Western Union spent millions on computer programming alone, not to mention the enormous expense of earth stations, satellites, etc. The low-cost telegram. Regardless of how much money you spend, regardless of how technologically interesting your service is, to get inside the prospect's mind, you have to relate to what's already there. You can't walk away from your existing position in the prospect's mind. And what's up there in the prospect's mind? The telegram, of course. Anytime you mention the word Western Union, the average mind conjures up the most famous yellow message in the history of the world. And the gram part of the mailgram name only reinforces this perception. So what's the difference between the new gram and the old gram? Well, the main difference is price. Both have the same telegraphic format. Both demand immediate attention. But the yellow telegram message is 3 times the price of the blue and white mailgram message. So the positioning theme developed for mailgram was simple: mailgram, impact of a telegram at a fraction of the cost. At this point, someone said, wait a minute. Why position mailgram against the telegram, also a Western Union service? Why take business away from ourselves? Furthermore, the telegram is a declining business. Why compare a new, modern service like mailgram with an old service past its prime? The telegram still has an important role to play, but it is not a growth business. The logic is impeccable. But as often happens, logic is not necessarily the best strategy for dealing with human minds. Still, the logic was so sound, it was worthwhile rethinking the concept. Especially since there was another positioning strategy that also had merit. The high-speed letter. Actually, the mailgram name itself suggests a second positioning approach. We could relate the mailgram to the U.S. mail. Then, too, if Western Union wanted the mailgram to take business away from another service, the numbers suggest it would be much better to position the service against regular mail. In a recent year, 68 billion first-class letters were dropped into the nation's letter boxes. That's 815 first-class letters per household per year. The telegram generates only a tiny fraction of that kind of volume. So a second theme was developed, mailgram, a new high-speed service for important messages. Which is the better approach? In spite of the negatives, positioning theory suggests that the low-cost telegram is a better direction than the high-speed letter. Yet mailgram was too important to Western Union to make a decision based on judgment alone. So both campaigns were test-marketed using computer data to track results. Low cost versus high speed. The test itself was a massive one. No tiny markets like Peoria were even considered. The 6 mailgram test cities were Boston, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. All big, important communication centers. Who won? Actually, both campaigns were effective. Here are the data for mailgram volume increases in the test cities during the 13-week program. These numbers alone were enough to prove the superiority of the low-cost telegram position. But what really decided the issue were the product awareness levels in the test cities, which were measured both before the program ran and afterward. Here are the figures on how many people could correctly describe what a mailgram was before the print and broadcast advertising began. Statistically, not much difference. This indicates that the test market cities were pretty evenly matched. In other words, about 1/4 of the market already knew about the mailgram service. After the advertising ran, however, there was a big difference in the two groups of cities. Here are the mailgram awareness levels 13 weeks later. As unbelievable as it may seem, awareness in the high-speed letter cities actually declined. From 27% to 25%. Not really statistically significant. Then where did the increased volume come from in the high-speed letter cities? Obviously from people who knew what a mailgram was and were reminded to use the service by the advertising. It was a totally different story in the low-cost telegram cities. Mailgram awareness more than doubled. From 23% to 47%. Not only was this a big jump, but the numbers suggest that mailgram volume increases were likely to continue over a long period of time. Western Union also measured telegram volume in the test cities before, during, and after the advertising. They found that volume held fairly stable. In fact, the company felt that advertising the mailgram as the low-cost telegram helped rather than hurt telegram volume. And what has happened to mailgram since the development of this advertising strategy? The volume numbers tell the story. After 10 years of success, Western Union decided to change the mailgram strategy. Instead of impact, the new strategy would emphasize next-day delivery. So they hired a new advertising agency to develop the new program. Again, the volume numbers tell the story. Rarely can you find such a clear-cut example of the difference between good advertising strategy and bad. Most examples are clouded by other factors. But in the mailgram case, the minute the strategy was changed, volume declined. Your problem is not just one of developing a good strategy. Equally important is the courage you will need to keep hammering at the same theme, year after year.